Well, I think that Jimmy, one of the main things about him was...
During the height of 1960s Hollywood, Natalie Wood and Steve McQueen were two of the biggest, most magnetic icons on the planet. When they starred together in Love with the Proper Stranger, their intense on-screen chemistry hid a far darker dynamic unfolding off-camera. Behind the scenes, McQueen pushed boundaries in a way that left Wood shaken to her core. Shortly before her tragic death, Natalie finally broke her silence, revealing a disturbing encounter with the King of Cool that she had guarded for years. So what did Steve McQueen actually do to Natalie, and why did she keep silent for so long? Join us as we uncover the truth. The childhood that prepared Natalie Wood for Hollywood's darkest moments. By the time Natalie Wood and Steve McQueen came together on the set of Love with the Proper Stranger, both had become two of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Their performances lit up the screen, convincing audiences they were watching two stars perfectly in sync. But while moviegoers saw effortless chemistry, Natalie was carrying the weight of an experience that had quietly changed the way she looked at one of Hollywood's most celebrated leading men. Years later, after keeping the story buried for decades, she would finally reveal what had happened behind the cameras. It was the kind of memory that never truly left her. And it all began long before she ever found herself standing opposite Steve McQueen. Long before the premieres, the flashing cameras, and the headlines that made her one of Hollywood's brightest young stars, Natalie was simply a little girl whose life had been shaped by a mother's relentless determination. She was born Natalie Zakharenko on July 20, 1938, in San Francisco, into a family of Russian immigrants who had survived unimaginable upheaval before finally finding a new beginning in America. Both sides of her family had escaped the violence and uncertainty that followed the Russian Revolution, leaving behind everything they had known in hopes of building a safer future. It was a story of resilience, sacrifice, and survival. But for Natalie's mother, Maria, surviving wasn't enough. She wanted something extraordinary for her daughter, and from the moment Natalie was born, she became convinced that child was destined for the silver screen. That dream took an unexpected step forward when the family settled in Santa Rosa, California. During a film production taking place nearby, members of the crew noticed the bright-eyed little girl and encouraged her parents to consider acting. While Natalie's father wasn't enthusiastic about uprooting the family for a career that seemed little more than fantasy, Maria refused to let the opportunity slip away. She believed fate had finally opened the door she had been waiting for, and she wasn't about to close it. Her determination paid off almost immediately. Natalie appeared in tiny roles while she was still a toddler, including brief moments in The Moon is Down and Happy Land. The parts were so small that many audiences probably never noticed her, but one person certainly did. Director Irving Pichel was captivated by the little girl's remarkable focus and emotional maturity. Unlike most child actors, Natalie seemed completely at ease in front of a camera. Pichel stayed in touch with her family, convinced she possessed something rare, and before long he called with another opportunity that would change everything. At just 7 years old, Natalie landed a major role in Tomorrow is Forever, starring alongside Hollywood legends Orson Welles and Claudette Colbert. For most children, sharing scenes with performers of that caliber would have been overwhelming. Natalie made it look effortless. Even Welles was astonished by her natural ability, later describing her as a born professional who acted from the heart, rather than simply reciting lines. It was praise that seasoned actors spent entire careers hoping to earn, and she received it before she had even reached her 8th birthday. But behind those remarkable performances was a childhood that wasn't nearly as magical as audiences imagined. Maria's obsession with making her daughter a star often came at a painful cost. During the filming of Tomorrow is Forever, Natalie struggled to cry during an emotional scene. Instead of comforting her daughter or allowing the moment to happen naturally, Maria resorted to something deeply disturbing. She reportedly tore apart a butterfly right in front of Natalie, knowing the sight would leave the little girl devastated enough to burst into tears. The camera captured exactly the emotion the filmmakers wanted, but the method revealed just how far Maria was willing to go in pursuit of Hollywood success. As shocking as that moment sounds today, it became an early lesson for Natalie. From a very young age, she learned that the entertainment industry often demanded silence, endurance, and sacrifice. Adults held the power, children were expected to obey, and uncomfortable experiences were simply treated as part of the job. It was a mindset that followed her as she continued climbing the Hollywood ladder, taking on bigger roles and working with even more influential stars. Film after film, Natalie's reputation only grew stronger. She appeared in The Bride Wore Boots, followed by The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, proving that her success was no childhood fluke. Studio executives were so confident in her future that they even changed the family's surname to Wood, believing it would be easier for American audiences to embrace. The transformation was complete. Natalie Zakarenko had become Natalie Wood, a rising star whose face was quickly becoming familiar across the country. To the outside world, it looked like every dream was coming true. She had talent that veteran actors admired, opportunities most performers could only imagine, and a future that seemed limitless. But beneath the glamorous image, years of pressure had taught Natalie to keep difficult experiences to herself, no matter how deeply they affected her. It was a habit that would stay with her well into adulthood, and when she eventually crossed paths with Steve McQueen, that silence would once again be put to the test. The tragic truth behind Natalie Wood's rise to stardom. By the mid-1960s, Natalie Wood had achieved what very few actresses ever could. She had survived the impossible transition from child star to serious actress, earned the respect of Hollywood's toughest critics, and stood shoulder to shoulder with legends like Elizabeth Taylor and Audrey Hepburn as one of the industry's biggest female stars. It seemed as though she had finally reached the point where every new film would only cement her legacy even further. But just when everything appeared to be falling perfectly into place, the cracks she'd spent a lifetime hiding began to surface. The turning point came with Penelope in 1966. On paper, it looked like another opportunity to showcase her charm. But behind the scenes, Natalie was falling apart. Years later, she admitted the production had been one of the most miserable experiences of her career. She broke out in painful hives, lived with constant anxiety throughout filming, and later recalled being in genuine physical and emotional agony almost every day. Even director Arthur Hiller sensed something was wrong, telling her that he felt she was resisting the film itself. At the time, Natalie couldn't explain why. After spending nearly 3 decades suppressing her emotions whenever the cameras rolled, she had finally reached a point where her body refused to stay silent. For most stars, a disappointing movie meant moving on to the next project. Natalie did the exact opposite. Instead of forcing herself through another production, she walked away from Hollywood entirely. It wasn't a publicity stunt or a temporary vacation. At the height of her fame, when studios still wanted her and audiences still filled theaters to watch her, Natalie stepped out of the spotlight and disappeared from movie screens for 3 years. The decision stunned Hollywood. Rumors immediately began circulating. Some believed she was emotionally exhausted. Others assumed her career had quietly run its course after a string of underperforming films. In an industry that rarely showed patience, many insiders were already writing her off, convinced the actress, who had once been considered one of Hollywood's brightest stars, had already seen her best days. The truth was far more personal. For the first time in her life, Natalie chose herself over her career. She began professional therapy to confront emotional struggles she had carried since childhood, struggles that had been buried beneath decades of nonstop work, impossible expectations, and the constant pressure to appear perfect. Then, she made another decision that shocked the industry. She paid Warner Brothers to cancel her contract and dismissed the entire team that had managed her career for years, including her agents, managers, publicist, accountant, and attorneys. It was an extraordinary move for an actress at the peak of her fame. But Natalie was no longer interested in letting other people decide what her life should look like. Looking back, it almost felt inevitable. From the time she was a little girl, she'd been taught to put the job first. She had endured relentless pressure from her mother, sacrificed a normal childhood, and learned to keep uncomfortable experiences locked away rather than confront them. That coping mechanism had helped her survive Hollywood, but it had also left scars that no amount of success could erase. Walking away wasn't giving up. It was the first decision she had ever made entirely for herself. During those years away from the cameras, Natalie finally found room to build a life outside the movie business. She began a relationship with British producer Richard Gregson, and in 1969, the two married. For a while, it seemed she had found the stability that had always been missing from her life. Away from studio executives and relentless production schedules, she was finally discovering who Natalie Wood was when she wasn't standing beneath bright lights. Still, Hollywood has a way of pulling its biggest stars back. After 3 years away, Natalie returned in Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice, and almost immediately reminded everyone why they had fallen in love with her in the first place. The film, which explored the rapidly changing attitudes toward marriage and relationships in late 1960s America, became both a critical and commercial success. Audiences embraced her return, critics praised her performance, and suddenly, the same industry that had questioned whether her career was over was celebrating one of the year's biggest hits. It was the kind of comeback most actors only dream about. But once again, Natalie refused to follow Hollywood's expectations. Rather than capitalizing on her renewed success by signing one project after another, she stepped back again, this time for a much happier reason. After becoming pregnant with her daughter Natasha in 1970, she chose to devote herself primarily to motherhood. For someone who had spent virtually her entire life working, the decision marked another dramatic shift in priorities. Acting was still important to her, but it was no longer the center of her world. She became far more selective about the roles she accepted, appearing only occasionally over the next several years. To some executives, it probably seemed like a wasted opportunity. But for Natalie, success no longer meant simply staying famous. For the first time, she was living life according to her own definition, instead of someone else's. Even so, whenever she returned to the screen, she proved she hadn't lost a single step. Toward the end of the 1970s, her performances in television dramas drew widespread praise, with critics noting a maturity and emotional depth that only seemed to grow stronger with age. One role even earned her a Golden Globe Award, confirming that her talent had never faded. If anything, the years away had only made her a more compelling actress. From the outside, Natalie Wood's story finally seemed complete. She had overcome the child star curse, rebuilt her career after being written off, found happiness away from Hollywood's relentless demands, and earned the admiration of both audiences and critics all over again. But there was one chapter of her life that remained unfinished. Long before her career hit its highest peak, before the breakdown that forced her away from Hollywood, before marriage, motherhood, and her celebrated comeback, Natalie had shared the screen with another rising superstar whose reputation seemed almost untouchable. To audiences, their chemistry looked effortless. Behind the cameras, however, one encounter left such a lasting impression that she kept it to herself for years. It wasn't until much later, when she finally looked back on that experience, that the carefully crafted image surrounding Steve McQueen began to crack. And what Natalie revealed would leave many people seeing the so-called King of Cool in a completely different light. The tragic love life of Natalie Wood. For all of Natalie Wood's success on screen, the role she wanted most wasn't one that came with cameras, scripts, or awards. More than anything, she wanted a happy marriage. After growing up in an industry where almost everything felt carefully managed, Natalie longed for the kind of love that made her feel safe, understood, and free to simply be herself. Ironically, the man she believed could give her that feeling entered her life long before either of them realized how complicated their story would become. Natalie was just 10 years old when she first spotted a young Robert Wagner on a studio lot. According to those closest to her, she turned to her mother and confidently announced that one day she was going to marry him. It sounded like nothing more than the innocent daydream of a little girl with a movie star crush, the kind of prediction people smile at and quickly forget. But years later, life had a remarkable way of bringing them together. When Natalie turned 18, the studio arranged a date between the rising actress and Wagner, who was 8 years older and still establishing himself in Hollywood. Their connection was instant. Years later, Wagner would recall the exact moment he realized he was in love. The two were spending an evening aboard his small boat when Natalie looked across the table at him, her face illuminated by the glow of a lantern. In his words, that single moment changed his life forever. The romance moved quickly. Despite reservations from Natalie's mother, who wasn't convinced the relationship was right for her daughter, Natalie followed her heart. The couple married in 1957, becoming one of Hollywood's most glamorous newlyweds. To the outside world, they looked like the perfect match. Young, successful, beautiful, and hopelessly in love, they seemed destined to become one of the industry's great lasting romances. But life behind closed doors proved far more complicated than the fairy tale magazines were selling. As both of their careers continued to soar, the pressures of fame slowly crept into their marriage. Long periods apart, demanding filming schedules, and the constant scrutiny that came with being one of Hollywood's golden couples gradually wore them down. By the summer of 1961, the strain had become too much. They separated, and less than a year later, their divorce was finalized. The end of the marriage devastated Natalie, but she didn't have much time to dwell on it. She had already thrown herself into work, and while filming Splendor in the Grass, she found herself growing close to her co-star, Warren Beatty. Their relationship quickly became one of Hollywood's most talked-about romances. The attraction between them was undeniable, but so was the volatility. Friends described the relationship as passionate, unpredictable, and emotionally draining. The highs were intoxicating, but the lows were just as intense. When the relationship finally came to an end in 1966, Natalie struggled more than most people realized. She overdosed on sleeping pills in what was widely reported as a suicide attempt. Although she recovered, the incident revealed just how emotionally exhausted she had become after years of public success and private heartbreak. Determined to rebuild her life, Natalie eventually found happiness with British producer Richard Gregson, Their relationship offered something different from the whirlwind romances that had come before it. And after nearly 3 years together, they married in 1969. The following year, they welcomed their daughter, Natasha, a moment that completely reshaped Natalie's priorities. For the first time since she had stepped onto a movie set as a little girl, her career was no longer the center of her world. Unfortunately, that marriage also began to unravel. Natalie became convinced that Gregson was having an affair, and whether her suspicions were justified or not, the trust between them had been broken. Just over 2 years after saying "I do," she filed for divorce, bringing yet another painful chapter of her love life to an end. Then came the twist almost no one saw coming. Only a few months after her divorce was finalized, Natalie found herself back in Robert Wagner's life. Time had changed them both. They had experienced failed relationships, personal disappointments, and years apart that forced them to grow in ways they never could have during their first marriage. Yet despite everything they had been through, the feelings they once shared never truly disappeared. In 1972, the couple remarried aboard Wagner's boat off the coast of Malibu, surprising an industry that rarely believed in second chances. While some dismissed the reunion as nostalgia, those closest to them insisted it was the real thing. Friends remembered how openly affectionate they were, constantly holding hands, stealing kisses, and enjoying each other's company in a way that often made everyone around them laugh. Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, later wrote that the couple had matured, learned from their mistakes, and were deeply committed to making their marriage work this time around. Their family grew once again with the birth of their daughter, Courtney, and for a while, Natalie finally seemed to have the stability she had spent her entire life searching for. Friends described her as a devoted mother who treasured family life just as much as she once treasured her career. Although Hollywood continued to offer her opportunities, she had reached a point where success was no longer measured by awards or box office numbers. The life she had built at home mattered far more. Like many stars of her era, Natalie was linked to several famous names over the years, including Michael Caine, David Niven Jr., and even future California Governor Jerry Brown. Decades after her death, former FBI agent Donald Wilson also claimed he had carried on a years-long affair with the actress during the 1970s, an allegation that has remained controversial and has never been conclusively verified. Whether those claims were true or not, they did little to change how those closest to Natalie viewed her greatest love. For everyone who truly knew her, Robert Wagner remained the man who occupied a place in her heart, unlike anyone else. He was the boy she dreamed about as a child, the husband she lost, and the man she ultimately chose, all over again. Their story was messy, imperfect, and filled with painful detours, but it was also one of Hollywood's most remarkable second chances. Yet while Natalie's marriages and romances often dominated headlines, they weren't the only relationships that left a lasting mark on her life. Away from the stories of love, heartbreak, and reconciliation was another chapter that remained hidden for years. It involved one of Hollywood's biggest leading men, a co-star the public believed she shared effortless chemistry with. But behind the cameras, Natalie experienced something she would carry with her long after filming ended. And when she finally spoke about Steve McQueen years later, the image of the legendary King of Cool suddenly became far more complicated than anyone had imagined. The hidden story behind Natalie Wood and Steve McQueen's classic film. Before Natalie Wood died, she kept a secret about what Steve McQueen did on the set of their 1963 film, Love with the Proper Stranger. For decades, the public only knew the story on the screen, a groundbreaking drama about two young people in New York dealing with an accidental pregnancy and the harsh realities of the early 1960s. But behind the scenes, there was a specific detail about Steve McQueen's performance that Natalie Wood chose not to make a big deal about during her life, leaving the truth to be fully understood only after her death. To understand the film, you have to look at the powerful story it told. Directed by Robert Mulligan and produced by Alan J. Pakula, with a screenplay by Arnold Schulman, the movie took on topics that Hollywood usually avoided in 1963. It was produced a decade before major legal changes, daring to show the dangerous, hushed-up reality of illegal backroom procedures to end a pregnancy in urban America. In the film, Natalie Wood played Angie Rossini, a sales clerk at Macy's department store in Manhattan. After a one-night stand with a part-time musician named Rocky Papasano, played by Steve McQueen, Angie finds herself pregnant. She does not ask Rocky for money to raise a baby or push him into a forced marriage. Her only request is that Rocky help her find and pay for someone willing to help her end the pregnancy. Meanwhile, her working-class brothers are pressuring her to marry Anthony, an unappealing but successful restaurant owner played by Tom Bosley in his official movie debut. Rocky and Angie scrape together enough money and run from her brothers through the neighborhood. But when they arrive in the New York City meatpacking district on a Saturday, Rocky realizes the person offering to end the pregnancy is not a real doctor at all, but a dangerous backroom provider. Refusing to let Angie undergo such a risky procedure, Rocky stops it and takes her to safety. After seeing Rocky's maturity, Angie grows to respect him. When Rocky gets a black eye from her oldest brother, he agrees to take his medicine and marry her out of duty. But Angie refuses. She wants true romance, what she calls bells and banjos, not a forced marriage. She moves out of her family home, begins dating Anthony, and acts aloof to test Rocky. Eventually, Rocky comes to her apartment for dinner, but after drinking, he makes crude advances on her and gets thrown out. The next day, Rocky finally wins her heart outside Macy's by ringing actual bells, playing a banjo, and holding a sign that reads, "Better wed than dead." Behind the scenes, the project had a fascinating history before filming even started. Writer Arnold Schulman had originally pitched the project to studios but couldn't sell it, so he wrote the script on spec. His agent attached Natalie Wood to the project. At that time, Natalie Wood was living with actor Warren Beatty, following their work together on the 1961 film Splendor in the Grass. The producers originally offered the lead role of Rocky directly to Warren Beatty. However, Beatty turned down the offer. After Beatty rejected the part, producers Alan J. Pakula and Robert Mulligan agreed to take a gamble and cast Steve McQueen, even though he was not yet established as a major movie star. The movie was also a major milestone for the crew, as it marked the first of 7 collaborations between Natalie Wood and legendary costume designer Edith Head. Additionally, while filming a scene inside a taxicab, the car drove right past a large movie billboard advertising a film starring Robert Wagner, who was Natalie Wood's former and future real-life husband. Despite these background distractions, what Steve McQueen actually did on set was bring his own personal life directly into his character without making a scene. The ring that Rocky wears in almost every scene of the film was not a prop picked out by the wardrobe department. It was actually Steve McQueen's real-life personal signet ring, stamped with his own initials, SM, written in overlapping script. While Natalie was dealing with the intense emotions of the heavy script, McQueen quietly anchored his character by wearing his own personal jewelry on camera every day, blending his real-world identity directly into the role of Rocky. Natalie Wood loved the project, later stating that playing Angie Rossini was the most rewarding experience I had in all films, all the way around. She earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress for her performance, and she chose to keep the focus entirely on the art and the groundbreaking story they created. She kept the quiet personal details of the production to herself, letting the real truth of what happened on set stay private until long after she was gone. Were you a fan of Love with the Proper Stranger? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.